Let me tell you a story about the Howl of the Damned, Act 1. The Hunter's Apprentice. The cold mountain winds howled as I rode through the ancient iron gates of the sanctum of silverlight, my cloak whipping behind me. The sky above was dark with storm clouds, a fitting omen for what was to come. The sanctum, a fortress older than the kingdom itself, stood on the cliffs, overlooking the Vale of Andurin, its towering spires gleaming like blades in the fading light. This was the home of the monster hunters, the last line of defense against the unnatural horrors that plagued the realm. And today, I would be given my first true assignment. I dismounted, handing my horse off to one of the stable hands, before making my way through the stone corridors, my boots echoing against the cold floors. Hunters moved past me, their armor dented, their weapons blood-stained. The sanctum had been busy. Whispers filled the halls. Another attack, another village lost. The Silver Moon pack was growing bolder. They were no longer lurking in the deep woods, no longer preying on the weak in the shadows. They had begun moving like an army, their numbers swelling, their strikes coordinated. Werewolves had always been dangerous, but this was something worse. I reached the great hall where Master Vendrick awaited me, the leader of the Sanctum of Silverlight. Vendrick was a man of few words and even fewer sympathies. His weathered face bore the scars of a dozen battles, his silver-streaked hair cropped short, his piercing gaze sharper than any blade. I stood before him and bowed. "You summoned me, Master." Vendrick studied me for a long moment, before nodding toward the large map spread across the table before him. "Tell me what you see, Balin." I stepped closer, scanning the marked locations. Dozens of villages, all attacked in the last moon cycle. Blood-red runes marked the sites where entire settlements had been wiped out. I exhaled. "This isn't random. It never is," Vendrick muttered. I looked up at him. "They're moving with purpose. These attacks," I pointed to the pattern. "They're not just feeding, they're expanding their territory." Vendrick nodded grimly. "They aren't just hunting, boy. They're building a kingdom of their own." A chill ran down my spine. Vendrick turned to me. "And we have a chance to stop them before it's too late." I met his gaze. "How?" He exhaled and folded his arms. "We have something no one else does. Fendra Blackbane." The name alone sent a shudder through me. Fendra Blackbane, the Moon Lord of the Wastes, the only werewolf who had ever ruled a kingdom, a legend, a terror, a creature who once led the largest pack in history, before he was finally captured and imprisoned beneath the sanctum. He had been locked away for 10 years, and now I was being sent to speak with him. "You're the youngest hunter in this sanctum," Vendrick said, "and that's why I'm sending you." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense." Vendrick smirked. "No, it doesn't. But he won't speak to me, or any of the other seasoned hunters. He despises us. But you," he leaned forward, "you are new, you are unproven. And to him you are still moldable. You think he'll talk to me? I think he will try to play you, and I think you need to be ready for that." I swallowed hard. "Go to Ironhold Prison," Vendrick commanded. "Speak with him, make him talk, find out what he knows about the Silver Moon pack before it's too late." I bowed and left the chamber, my heart pounding in my chest. I had trained for years for this moment, but I had never imagined my first assignment would send me into a den of monsters. The journey to Ironhold Prison took 2 days. The prison was an ancient fortress built into the mountains, carved from stone older than the kingdom itself. It had once been a dwarven stronghold before the sanctum repurposed it into a prison for the unnatural. Iron gates loomed ahead, reinforced with silver and blessed runes, to hold back the horrors within. As I dismounted and approached the entrance, the guards stiffened. They did not look at me, they looked at the prison. I met with Warden Gaius inside the stone walls. He was an aging knight, his face lined with deep scars, his left eye missing. He had spent a lifetime hunting werewolves, and he despised them. "I don't like this," Gaius growled, walking beside me through the dimly lit corridors. The air was thick with the scent of silver and damp stone. "I don't know why Vendrick thinks that thing deserves an audience. He might have information that could stop the Silver Moon Pack," Gaius scoffed. "Or he might tear your throat out before you get a single word out of him." We reached the lower levels, where the most dangerous creatures were kept. Only one cell was occupied. Chains of pure silver wrapped around the bars, glowing faintly with warding magic. Inside, in the cold darkness, sat Fendra Blackbane. He did not move. He did not acknowledge our arrival. He sat with his head slightly tilted, his golden eyes reflecting the torchlight. His hair was long and silver-threaded, his features striking yet inhuman, like something carved from stone, only half remembering what it meant to look like a man. Despite his captivity, he radiated authority, like a king sitting upon a throne of chains. Gaius leaned toward me. "Don't step too close, and don't ever let him smell your fear." I nodded, stepping forward. "Fendra Blackbane," I said. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Ah," he murmured, his voice smooth as silk. "Vendrick sends me a pup." I stiffened. His golden eyes studied me, slow and deliberate. "What is your name, boy?" "Balin Thorn," I said. His smile widened. "A good name, strong, fitting for a hunter." His eyes gleamed. "Tell me, Balin Thorn, do you believe you are a hunter?" I exhaled. "I know I am." He chuckled. "How fascinating." I ignored the way my skin crawled and forced myself to stand tall. "Tell me what you know about the Silver Moon Pack." His smile did not fade. "No." I clenched my fists. "You will." He tilted his head slightly. "And why would I do that?" "Because they are growing, and if they are not stopped, they will tear this kingdom apart." "And why should I care?" he asked, his voice amused. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Because they are not yours." His smile vanished. For the first time something flickered in his golden eyes. I had his attention. "You are perceptive," he murmured, "but you are asking the wrong question." "Then what is the right question?" He leaned forward, his chains clinking softly. "The pup does not hunt alone," he said, his voice quiet, almost thoughtful. "The master chooses the prey." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He smiled once more, leaning back into the shadows. "You'll find out soon enough." I left the prison more unsettled than I had ever been in my life, and by nightfall news reached us that Lady Isolde had been taken. The Silver Moon Pack had made their move, and now the hunt was on. Act 2. The Bargain with the Beast. The howling came at dusk. I stood on the ramparts of Ironhold Prison, the wind cutting through my cloak like a blade. The mountains beyond the walls stretched endlessly into the darkening sky, and somewhere out there, the Silver Moon Pack was hunting. The wolves were growing bolder. Lady Isolde had been taken. Her father, Lord Everan, had offered a king's ransom for her return, but gold meant nothing to the pack. They didn't want money, they wanted blood, and I needed Fenrir Blackbane to tell me why. The corridors of Ironhold were empty save for the flickering torchlight and the distant clinking of chains. The deeper I descended into the prison, the colder the air grew, thick with the scent of silver and old stone. Fenrir sat as I had left him, bound in his cage of silver. His golden eyes flickered open as I approached, a slow, knowing smile curling across his lips. "You came back," he murmured. "I was beginning to think you'd forgotten me." I ignored his bait. "You knew they would take her." He tilted his head slightly. "Did I?" I took a step closer. "The Silver Moon Pack abducted Lady Isolde. You knew it was going to happen. And you let it." He chuckled. "And what would you have had me do, Hunter? Call out a warning from my prison? Send a raven with my shackled hands?" I clenched my jaw. "Tell me where they took her." His eyes gleamed with amusement. "Now we come to it." He stretched, rolling his shoulders. "You still don't understand, do you? You come to me like a starving dog begging for scraps, and yet you offer me nothing in return." I exhaled sharply. "You want something?" He grinned. "Everything is a trade. Balin Thorn, that is how the world works. You want answers." He leaned forward. "Then give me something real." I hesitated. I had known this moment would come. Fenrir was a master of control, and if I gave him too much, he would own me before I even realized it. But I needed answers, so I chose my words carefully. "My village was burned," I said quietly, "years ago, when I was a child. Fenrir watched me with those unreadable golden eyes. My mother and father were killed, my sister too. I survived." I swallowed. "That's why I became a hunter, to stop it from happening to someone else." Fenrir was silent for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Now we begin." Master Venrik was waiting for me when I returned to the Sanctum of Silverlight. The great hall was empty save for a few hunters lingering by the hearth, sharpening their blades and mending their armor. The shadows flickered against the stone walls, giving the room an eerie glow. Venrik was seated at the long table, a goblet of dark wine resting at his elbow. He watched me approach with the quiet patience of a man who already knew the answers. "You spoke with him," he said. I nodded. "And he knows more than he lets on," I admitted, "but he wants something in return." Venrik took a slow sip of his wine. "They always do." I hesitated. "You knew he would play me." "Of course." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, Balin." I did. Venrik set his goblet down. "Fenrir is not a man to be trusted. He will tell you what you want to hear, but only if it serves his own ends." I exhaled. "Then what you want me to do?" Venrik leaned forward. "You give him what he wants." I frowned. Venrik smirked. "We let him believe he is winning. We play his game." I hesitated. "And what if he sees through it?" Venrik's eyes darkened. "Then you will learn just how dangerous the beast in the cage truly is." The next time I returned to Ironhold, Fenrir was waiting. He was seated with an unnatural stillness, his golden eyes locked onto mine before I even reached the cell. He smiled slowly. "Ah, Hunter, you look troubled." I ignored him. "You wanted something in return." He tilted his head. "Indeed." I exhaled. "A deal has been made. If you give us the location of the Silver Moon Pack, the Sanctum will offer you something in return." His smile widened. "Oh, and what would that be?" I hesitated. "A release from silver bindings, not from the prison itself, but a less restrictive confinement." He chuckled. "Ah, Venrik is clever." He leaned forward. "And tell me, Hunter, did you believe it when you said it?" I clenched my fists. His smile did not fade. "That's the difference between us, Balin Thorn," he murmured. "I can smell a lie, even when you don't know you're telling one." I took a slow breath. "Then why don't you call my bluff?" He chuckled. "Because I enjoy the game." He leaned back against the stone wall, exhaling lazily. "Very well, since you've been such a good sport, I shall give you something in return." He paused, as if savoring the moment. "The Silver Moon Pack is not hunting at random," he said. "Their leader is no savage beast. He is a tactician, a builder." I frowned. "A builder of what?" His golden eyes gleamed. "A kingdom." My blood ran cold. They are not mindless killers, he continued. They were made, shaped, transformed not by accident, but by purpose. I stared at him. What are you saying? He grinned. They were once men. Venric did not look surprised when I told him. He only sighed. I feared as much. I frowned. You knew. I suspected, he admitted, but I needed confirmation. I clenched my jaw. Who is behind it? Venric exhaled. That is the question, isn't it? I stared at the map, at the ruins of villages, at the trails of blood leading into the mountains. They're turning them, I whispered. They're taking hunters, warriors, knights, and turning them into wolves. Venric nodded grimly. And the question now, Balan, is who is doing it. The next day, Warden Gaius sent a company of knights to the location Fenrir had given. It was a trap. There was no silver moon pack waiting for them, only an ambush, only blood, only death. And as I sat in the torchlit halls of Ironhold, staring into the golden eyes of the beast who had sent them to die, I realized something terrible. Fenrir Blackbane had just won the first move, and the game had only begun. Act 3. The escape. The moon was rising. I could feel it in the air, thick and electric, like a storm waiting to break. It pulled at my skin, my bones, something primal inside me that I refused to acknowledge. I did not turn into a beast beneath its light, but there were those who did, and tonight, one of them would break free. The hallways of Ironhold prison were darker than usual, the torches burning lower, casting long, jagged shadows across the stone. The guards stationed outside Fenrir's cell were tense, their hands resting uneasily on their weapons. The full moon was 2 nights away, and everyone in Ironhold knew it. Warden Gaius had tripled the security around Fenrir, reinforcing the silver bindings, layering the walls with fresh sigils of warding. He believed it would be enough. I wasn't so sure. I descended into the lowest levels, my boots echoing against the stone, the weight of my weapons heavy at my side. I did not come to bargain this time. I came for the truth. Fenrir was waiting for me. He always was. He sat in the dim light of his cell, the silver chains draped across his shoulders, like a king's mantle, his golden eyes catching the torchlight. "You've come again, Hunter," he murmured. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." I ignored his bait. "The silver moon pack is preparing for something. I need to know what." He smiled. "Do you?" I took a step closer. "You told me they weren't hunting at random, that they were building something." He tilted his head. "Did I?" I clenched my fists. "Enough games." His smile didn't fade, but something in his expression shifted, his amusement turning to something colder. "You are different tonight," he said, desperate. "Good. You are ready to hear the truth." I exhaled. "Then give it to me." His golden eyes locked onto mine. "Their leader," he said slowly, "was not always a beast." I stiffened. He continued. "Once, he was a hunter, just like you." I frowned. "Who?" Fenrir's voice lowered, almost reverent. "Ser Eldrick Vaughn." The name hit me like a blade to the chest. Ser Eldrick Vaughn, a legend among hunters, a man who had once led the Sanctum's greatest campaigns against the werewolf clans of the north. He had slain more beasts than any man alive. And then, one night, he vanished. No one knew where he had gone. No one had found his body. We had assumed he was dead, but Fenrir had just shattered that illusion. "Eldrick is alive," I whispered. Fenrir nodded. "And he is the one remaking the world." I took a slow breath, my mind racing. Why would he turn? I asked. Why would a hunter join the beasts he once hunted? Fenrir smiled faintly. "Isn't it obvious?" I shook my head. He leaned forward, his golden eyes gleaming. "Because he chose to." The words sent a chill through me. Eldrick Vaughn had not been turned against his will. He had embraced the transformation. He had abandoned his humanity by choice. The realization settled over me like a weight. The leader of the Silver Moon Pack had once been one of us, and now he was creating an army. That night, I sat alone in the barracks, my thoughts churning. Eldrick Vaughn. I had spent my life hunting monsters, believing them to be nothing more than beasts. But this was something worse. A monster who had once been a man. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but I needed more. I needed to know why. So the next day, I returned to Fenrir's cell, and this time, I told him everything. I told him about my village, the night I had lost everything, the flames that had swallowed the houses, the howls that had echoed through the trees, the blood that had stained the snow. I told him about my sister, how I had tried to protect her, how I had failed. I had never spoken those words aloud before, and yet as I said them, Fenrir listened in silence. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "You and I," he murmured, "are not so different." I stiffened. "We are nothing alike." He smiled faintly. "Aren't we? You lost your sister. I lost my pack." I narrowed my eyes. "You slaughtered innocents." He chuckled. "And your sanctum has never done the same." I clenched my fists, because I did not have an answer. I turned to leave, and that was when he said it. "The moon rises soon, Hunter." I froze. He smiled. "You should be ready." The attack came at dusk. The moment the sun touched the horizon, the howling began. It echoed through the mountains, rising like a storm, a chorus of voices woven into the wind. And then Ironhold burned. The Silver Moon Pack had come. They struck with precision, their movements coordinated, their strikes lethal. This was not a mindless slaughter. This was a rescue mission, and I knew exactly who they had come for. I ran through the chaos, dodging the bodies of fallen guards, my blade slick with blood. I had one destination, Fenrir's cell. I reached the lower levels, just in time to see the silver chains snapping like brittle vines. Fenrir stood in the center of his cell, his golden eyes burning brighter than ever, his arms raised as the shattered pieces of his bindings clattered to the floor. He turned to me, his smile slow and wolfish. "Hello, Balin." I drew my sword. He sighed. "Put that away." I did not lower it. His eyes glowed brighter. "You were warned," he murmured, and then he moved, faster than I could react, faster than anything human. His claws raked across my arm, sending me stumbling back, my sword slipping from my grasp. I hit the wall hard, my vision swimming. Fenrir stepped over me, his gaze almost pitying. "You have always been hunting the wrong prey," he said softly. Then he was gone, a blur of silver and shadow vanishing into the night. The last thing I heard was the sound of his laughter, fading into the howling storm. By dawn, Ironhold was nothing but ruins. Warden Gaius was dead, the Silver Moon Pack had fled, and Fenrir Blackbane had escaped. I stood among the wreckage, my hands shaking, my thoughts racing. Eldrick Vaughn was building an army, and now he had Fenrir Blackbane at his side. The war had begun, and I had let it happen. Act 4. The descent into the wolf's den. The hunt had changed. I was no longer the one tracking the beasts. I was the one being hunted. The moment Fenrir Blackbane escaped Ironhold, the balance of power shifted. The Silver Moon Pack was no longer a scattered force of wild creatures lurking in the dark. They were an army, and their war had begun. I rode hard for 2 days, following the trail of destruction Fenrir and his kind had left behind. Villages burned in their wake. The air was thick with the stench of smoke and blood, the carcasses of livestock strewn in the dirt, bodies of the fallen, twisted and broken in the ruins of their homes. But the deaths weren't what disturbed me most. It was the ones who had been taken. I found their tracks leading away from the wreckage, not a retreat, but an exodus. The Silver Moon Pack wasn't just killing. They were taking people, turning them, forcing them into the fold. I had seen werewolves before, had fought them, had watched them tear through villages in mindless hunger. But this was something different. This was war. By the time I reached the Sanctum of Silverlight, the halls were alive with tension. Master Venric stood over the war table, his hands pressed against the map, a scowl carved deep into his face. "We have them," he said. I stiffened. "Where?" Venric gestured to the eastern mountains. "Our scouts tracked their movements after Ironhold. The pack has been seen gathering near the ruins of Verendor." I frowned. "That's impossible. I just came from the western valleys. That's where the attacks have been happening. If they were heading east, they wouldn't be burning villages out west." Venric's eyes flickered with irritation. "The scouts saw them. Then the scouts saw what they wanted us to see." I shot back. Silence settled over the room. The others, the hunters who had trained me, the ones who had always been older, faster, better, watched me with unreadable expressions. I had been the lowest among them once, the orphan boy given a sword and a purpose. Now, I was questioning the command of their leader, but I wasn't wrong. Venric exhaled sharply. "What are you saying, Balin?" I stepped forward, jabbing my finger at the map. "I've been tracking them. I've followed their movements, their patterns, the way they've been choosing their targets. This isn't mindless carnage." I met his gaze. "This is a diversion." Venric's jaw tightened. "You believe they aren't in the mountain?" I shook my head. "They want us to think they are, but their true den is elsewhere." Venric's eyes narrowed. "Where then?" I hesitated, because I already knew the answer. I just didn't want to say it. But Fenrir had already told me, not with words, but with the way he had looked at me before he left. I swallowed hard. The Blackthorn Keep. A ripple of shock moved through the gathered hunters. Venric's face darkened. "That place is a ruin." "Exactly," I said. "No one would look for them there." Venric stared at the map. I could see the war in his mind. Logic told him to trust his scouts, to send the entire force to the mountains. But instinct, the very thing that had kept him alive this long, told him to trust me. He exhaled sharply. "We march for the mountains at dawn." I stiffened. "Venric," he met my gaze. "If you truly believe they are at Blackthorn Keep, then go." My stomach twisted. "Alone?" He nodded. I swallowed hard, because I already knew what I had to do, and I already knew it was a suicide mission. But I didn't hesitate. I turned and walked out of the chamber. Blackthorn Keep was waiting for me. The ruin stood atop a craggy ridge, its stone walls long since crumbled, its towers leaning like broken teeth against the sky. I rode into the ruins, beneath a sky thick with storm clouds, my sword strapped to my back, my heart pounding in my chest. The moment I crossed through the shattered gates, I knew they were already watching me. I could feel their eyes in the shadows, hear the whisper of movement, the low rumble of a growl carried on the wind. I dismounted, stepping forward. "I know you're here," I said. The wind stirred. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall, broad, wrapped in shadow and authority. His silver-threaded hair was pulled back, his armor gleaming with fresh polish, his face still chiseled with the same cold discipline of a hunter, but his golden eyes burned like a beast. Sir Eldrick Vaughan smiled. You came alone, he mused. How bold. I drew my sword, he sighed. Always a hunter first, aren't you? I held my ground. Why? He raised an eyebrow. Why? What? Why betray the sanctum? My voice was hoarse. Why turn yourself into one of them? Eldric's smile faded. He stepped closer, his golden gaze never leaving mine. You see the world in absolutes, Balin, he murmured. Man or monster, hunter or prey, order or chaos. He exhaled, shaking his head. But the world is changing, boy, and you refuse to see it. I clenched my jaw. See what? His expression hardened. The old world is dying, Balin, he said softly. I am simply giving it teeth. My grip tightened on my sword. You're building an army, he nodded. A new kingdom, one where men are not weak, one where we are not bound by the chains of fragile flesh. I felt my pulse in my throat. You think you're saving them, I whispered. He smiled. I know I am. I shook my head. You're enslaving them. His golden eyes flashed. And what do you think your sanctum has done for centuries? He asked, his voice turning cold. I stiffened. You were raised in their walls, he continued. You were taught their ways. But did you ever question them? Did you ever ask yourself who they serve? Who benefits from their endless hunt? I swallowed hard. We save people. Do you? He stepped forward. Or do you simply choose who is allowed to live and who is allowed to die? My hands were shaking because I didn't have an answer. Eldric exhaled. Come with me, Balin. I stilled. His voice was calm, almost gentle. Join us, he said. I have seen what you are, what you could become. I shook my head. No, he sighed. Then you leave me no choice. The torches flickered, the shadows stirred, and then the wolves stepped from the darkness. I was surrounded. Eldric smiled sadly. Run, hunter, he murmured, and I did. Act 5. The Howl of the Damned. The ruins of Blackthorn Keep were a tomb of shadows and silence. The moon had climbed high, casting its silver glow through the broken towers, illuminating the twisted banners that once belonged to kings long dead. The wolves had scattered, their leader's will commanding them into the darkness. But Eldric Vaughan had stayed behind, waiting for me. The hunt had ended, and now it was time to kill the last great wolf. I pressed my back against the cold stone, breathing slow, listening. The wind howled through the ruins, but beneath it, I could hear something else. Footsteps, measured, purposeful. Eldric wasn't hiding. He was stalking. He wanted me to hear him. You made your choice, Balin. His voice echoed through the corridors, smooth and unhurried. I hoped you would see reason, but all you ever saw was fear. I said nothing. Silence was my weapon now. The torches lining the halls flickered, the flames dancing in the wind. I knew what was coming. Eldric's boots scraped against the stone. You still think this is about good and evil, he murmured. About man and monster. His voice shifted, moving behind me. It never was. And then the torches died. Total darkness swallowed the keep. The air became thick, my own breath loud in my ears. My vision was useless now. The only thing I could rely on was sound, which was exactly what Eldric wanted. The darkness was his domain. I heard the whisper of claws against stone, the shift of fabric as he moved, then his voice too close. You are afraid. A gust of wind. I ducked, just in time to avoid the strike. His claws tore through the air, where my throat had been, raking across the stone wall instead. Sparks flared, a brief glimpse of his wolf-like silhouette, before the night swallowed him again. He was toying with me, but I had been trained for this. I slowed my breath, listened, let the darkness tell me where he was. The silence stretched, then a shift in the air, the faintest whisper of movement. I turned and struck. My silver blade sliced through the dark, and this time it met flesh. Eldrick let out a snarl, staggering back, his golden eyes flashing in the blackness. I didn't stop. I lunged again, my blade a streak of silver in the night. He caught my wrist, his grip inhumanly strong. Then he twisted, slamming me into the stone. The impact stole my breath. My head cracked against the wall, white-hot pain searing through my skull. I collapsed to my knees, my vision swimming. Eldrick loomed over me. "You were never meant to win this fight," he said. His voice was almost gentle. "You're not ready." He raised his claws, and I did the only thing I could. I listened, not to his words, not to my fear, to his breathing, to the shift of his weight, to the way his muscles tensed just before the strike. And as he lunged, I moved. I twisted underneath him, bringing my blade up in a clean, swift arc. The silver steel found his heart. Eldrick staggered, his breath hitched, his golden eyes flickered, not with rage, but with something else, surprise. He fell to his knees, one hand grasping the blade buried in his chest. His fingers trembled around the hilt, as if trying to pull it free, but it was too late. The silver was already burning him from the inside. His body convulsed, the shift between man and beast flickering uncontrollably. His features twisted, fangs receding, claws retracting, then returning. The magic inside him fought to keep him alive, but I had cut too deep. He let out a slow breath, looking up at me. "You were always the one," he murmured. I frowned. "What?" His lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Then his body collapsed. The golden light in his eyes faded. Eldrick Vaughan, the first of the turned hunters, was dead. The Silver Moon Pack had no leader, and yet, as I stood over his body, I felt no victory. By morning the ruins were empty. The werewolves had fled into the wilds, leaderless but not broken. I staggered from the keep, my sword still slick with Eldrick's blood, my body aching, my mind numb. I had done what I was meant to do. The Sanctum of Silverlight would call this a victory. But the hunt was not over. I had stopped one monster, but another still remained. I returned to the sanctum alone. The halls were filled with murmurs. The hunters stared as I walked past, some with awe, others with something closer to fear. Word had already spread. I had killed Eldrick Vaughan. Venric met me in the great hall, his expression unreadable. "You did what had to be done," he said. I nodded, but the words felt empty. The hunters celebrated. They raised their cups, toasting to the end of the Silver Moon Pack, to the fall of the greatest traitor in our order's history. But I did not drink, because I knew the truth. Eldrick's war had ended, but Fenric's had just begun. Days passed. I healed. I tried to sleep, but I never did. And then a message arrived. It was waiting for me in my chamber, delivered by unseen hands. No one had seen who had left it. No one had heard them enter. Just a single scrap of parchment, resting on my desk. I unfolded it with slow, deliberate fingers. A single sentence was scrawled in ink. "You silenced one wolf boy, but the night still sings." My breath caught, and beneath the words pressed into the wax seal was a single mark, a wolf's eye, golden, burning alive. Far from the kingdom, beyond the reach of men, a figure walked alone through the wilds. His silver-threaded hair caught the moonlight, his golden eyes glowing beneath the blackened sky. His breath curled in the cold air, his footsteps soundless against the forest floor. The trees whispered, the wind howled, and Fenric Blackbane smiled. The hunt was not over, not yet.